Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers your Arizona Cardinals, on one of our normal shows with Seth Cox.com. What the heck? Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site episode. It's either 581 or 582, depending on when I get this posted. As Howard Balzer has an audio update as well with roster cuts, and that's this show. This is our post roster cuts on the show, because the Cardinals, we're recording on a Tuesday night. The Cardinals made their cuts to get the roster down to 53 players. And so how we're going to treat this show, as I talked with Seth beforehand, is rather than, go through surprises, we're just going to go position by position. We're going to talk about who got cut, who's left, our reactions to it, and what do we think will happen in the days to come with each position, Seth. Overall, though, your takeaways from how the Cardinals approached this preseason and training camp, I mean, with nobody of any sort of note playing, it sort of feels like finally we're here. And that's kind of that's how I feel right now.
Yeah, it's been so long, and this has been extra long for me. Everybody knows I do the youth football coaching thing, but I'm now doing high school football as well, and it extended how much football I do. And I can tell you from just a personal perspective, I am just ready for real regular football, no scrimmages, no preseasons, no nothing. Like, just let's get to actual games. And my oldest son played his first game last weekend or last Friday, and then my freshman plays his first game tomorrow as we're recording on a Tuesday. So it's like finally getting to some like productivity after, for me, what's been 6 months of off-season work, and then I can actually enjoy the Cardinals on Sundays, because it's not going to be guys that weren't going to be here in September anyways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started. We're going to break it down. Each segment will cover a certain number of positions. We'll start off in our first segment talking about two positions that I would say had two of the most surprising cuts if you're outside the organization, right? If you were looking from the outside in, you would look at the quarterback room and the running back room, and you would be surprised at the cuts that were made. The quarterback room, that's down to 2, and none of the Cardinals fans, we aren't surprised by this, but Desmond Ridder was released. Clayton Tune wins the backup job, assuming that the Cardinals don't make another move at quarterback. But Desmond Ridder was among final cuts. I say Ridder is perhaps the most surprising cut, unless you watch the Cardinals play in the preseason. Because if you look at the Cardinals going into this offseason, Kyler Murray's back. The only quarterback that they have under contract other than him is Clayton Tune. And if you watch Clayton Tune play in the one start last year, you think, oh my gosh, he's terrible. He's terrible, because he had one of the worst starting debuts in NFL history. 0 points, 58 passing yards, 2 interceptions, a fumble, and he was sacked 7 times. That's absurd. And they go and trade for Desmond Ridder. Like, they traded for Desmond Ridder in the offseason, a guy that he started 17 games over 2 years and had a modicum of success. Wasn't good, but wasn't bad. And Ridder came in. And so from the outside looking in, Ridder getting cut in favor of Clayton Tune, I think, is a shock. But if you're like You fans watch the preseason. We watch the preseason. If you spent any time in training camp, Ritter was highly unimpressive. Maybe it is simply the fact that Toon had an extra year in the system, but Toon progressed while Ritter looked worse than he ever had in his NFL career.
Yeah, and he's looked decidedly worse. We talked about this, like, and then, it's unfortunate he got hammered in the last game and wasn't able to finish the game, which, is that sucked, right? But the
Maybe
reality
it was
is,
court support because the very next play, Toon threw a pick six.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, that was so
and
bad.
and it's just one of those situations, right, where you look at it and you go, well, this is just not. It wasn't a very good player. Very rarely do you get young quarterbacks traded that work out, right? And even in secondary roles, Denver's an interesting situation with Zach Wilson, but is he the lead backup? Is it Jarrett Stidham? So all of those things kind of are interesting to watch moving forward, but it just didn't work out with Ritter, and it is what it is. It's kind of unfortunate because you wanted to see that, but on the flip side, I think you and I have said this a couple of times. It was good in the sense that, like, Clayton Tune earned the job.
Yeah.
While Ritter was very bad, and I don't mean to say that in the negative way that it sounds. He was very bad. Clayton Tune was good, and it wasn't just like, oh, he was bad too. Now, granted, he didn't play as good in game 2 and 3 as he did in game 1, which was ironic because in 2 and 3 he played first, right, as opposed to second. So interesting overall, to see where guys end up. The question I have on Ritter, and I'm interested to get your take on this, with how bad he was in the preseason, how bad he was last year, is there a chance that he clears waivers and then the Cardinals, if they choose to, could bring him back to the practice squad?
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Honestly,
It would be
and
different. It would be different if he didn't look so bad last year, and then obviously parlayed that into not looking good this year. But like, I'm just interested if, like, and again, this is going to come out way harsher than I mean it to. Like, who's going to claim him after the last, 3 preseason games?
I don't know, especially when there's the Cardinals. Like, the Cardinals trading for him made sense because they needed a backup quarterback. He had starting experience, but he just looked not good. And I ultimately think that's kind of the plan. And I think it's probably the best route for Ritter is to be on the practice squad, to learn more of this offense, to be more comfortable in it. And I mean, you never know. They're going to need a third quarterback, and if you're going to have a third quarterback on the roster, can you think of anyone? Can you think of anyone out there that you would rather have as your third quarterback than Desmond Ritter? I mean, they've already, it's like they kind of just flipped the roles because Clayton Tune on the practice squad makes sense because he's developmental, but he passed Ritter, and so the only type of quarterback that you really keep on the practice squad is someone who's old journeyman, aka Jeff Driscoll a year ago, or young, still hasn't figured out who he is. Then they can run scout team, and
but also I think the difference is, and you hit it, like, Tune was better, and that makes him harder to get through waivers as well. Where
absolutely,
where teams are like, we haven't seen, like you said, his start last year was bad, but the growth that we've seen over the offseason, the growth that we saw in the preseason, he hasn't been bad in games like Ritter has, and that's a reality of it, right? Like, it's the ugly side of the business in that, a guy like Toon is just a better project or prospect at this stage, even though he was, a third or a day 3 pick and Ritter was a third round pick, because like that's just the way the NFL works, right? Like once you've kind of been cast, you've got to work your way back up. And Ritter's been cast as a failure, again, not Jess or I's,
But
take on him, but what the
the
NFL thought.
Falcons drafted him believing he could be their franchise quarterback.
Right. And he failed.
And he failed at that.
And so then he's out, and now and then again, I'm not trying to be harsh on the guy, but he was bad in the preseason, and that makes it really hard to find your role in the NFL, because that was your next opportunity to be better, and he just wasn't.
Yeah. And so do you see the possibility of them going a different route at quarterback? I think they're set on Toon, and I'll say this is that Jonathan Gannon has liked Clayton Toon since the beginning, and there was a quote last year that some people thought about, like someone was kind of asking if they needed a veteran quarterback, and they didn't catch the part. It's like, we've got one we trust. And he listed the traits that Toon had, and while he didn't play well in his opportunities, we said it in one of the last shows that we talked about, is the fact I can't recall a young quarterback, like day 3 type quarterback, that made improvements, like that made significant improvement in play from one year to the next, like when you saw him in the preseason. Logan Thomas, nope. Ryan Lee, nope. Even go back to John Skelton. He got the one start as a rookie. He flashed in 2011, but it's not like he was better in 2012. In fact, he went backwards significantly in 2012 when he was playing enough that got his butt benched and ended up with Ryan Lindley starting. And so we've seen these project quarterbacks brought in. Max Hall was, flashed for a game, and then it was terrible. And every time that there's a young quarterback, you don't see progress. And this is I think that the most promising thing about Toon is that year 1, he looked completely overmatched. At least in year 2 in the preseason, he looked like some of his throws were fantastic. And I'm going to basically give him a mulligan for that terrible pick 6 when he came in for Ritter. That's different. Obviously, that's the same sort of situation you might come into a game, but it's a completely different scenario, because if he's the backup, he's going to be prepared. In a preseason game, he's already played his role and is checked out. Like, he wasn't supposed to play again. And
right.
So
that there is a huge difference in that.
Right. Like he was already mentally checked out, because the preseason is not the regular season. He didn't prepare as the backup to have to come in and he had already played. He started. You just don't start a game, come out, and expect to come back in to replace the guy behind you. And that's how that went. So, but overall, Toon made good decisions. He made he did take too many sacks. Like, that's the one thing, but he's a young quarterback still. But when he got rid of the ball, he had good anticipatory throws. And that's the first thing that we saw. And so I can't think of a better option as their number 3 quarterback than having Ritter on the practice squad. And I don't think he'll get claimed. And I would think he would like to stay as well.
And I do have some odd inside information on that.
Ooh.
His kid actually is in preschool at one of my friends' preschools. So like,
he's already established. They've already kind of got him in.
They've established things, and they're, to your point, I doubt that unless it was for a lead backup job where you're talking millions of dollars, they're looking to move the family after, kind of bringing them here, getting them settled and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Let's go to the running back position then, because The 4 guys that made it, I kind of felt like 5 running backs was going to be hard, but I convinced myself on it. I convinced that they would keep 5, but ultimately they kept the 4 that I thought they would keep, and Michael Carter ended up getting cut. Now, again,
Man, people are mad about that.
It kind of makes sense because Michael Carter is a talented back who has been like, when he's had opportunities to play, he's played well, and he's been caught up in the numbers game in 2 straight situations. He looked good as the backup last year on the field, but like you can't keep a 5th running back who is going to make $3 million because he hit a playing time escalator in his contract that bumped his salary up to $3 million.
Well, especially when he doesn't play special teams. Like, right. I don't think people realize if you're running back 3-4, like, you have to play.
Like he could be a 3rd down back. He could have the DeMarco's role, but DeMarco's really good at that role.
And DeMarco's a way better pass protector.
Yeah, and he plays a lot on 4th down. Like, it made very clear, like, we wondered about it, like last year he quietly made the team, but like the way he was used in the offseason and then the comments that Gannon said, he's going to have a big role on 3rd down and on 4th round. Like, it was the first sort of anything that I've heard Jonathan Gannon sort of hint that there was a guy that was a lock for the roster that wasn't a starter. And so once he said that, I'm like, oh, I mean, it's Michael Carter's on the outside. And I mean, I honestly don't think since he, like, I don't think he'll clear weight. I don't think he will get picked up because of the simple fact that he is due to make $3 million. And so if you claim him, you pick up that contract. I don't know though if he would practice squad it though. And so as much as I'd like to have him back, and he's a good player, he's made plays in every role he's been given, but again, context. When you are playing late in preseason games and you are someone of upper talent, like someone who's been a starter, you should look good and make plays, and that's exactly what he did. So he was just doing what he looked the way he was supposed to. I did talk myself into keeping 5 running backs, even though that's an irresponsible thing to do roster-wise. I just thought perhaps maybe he would end up being a guy who you could trade. But I think ultimately what it came down to is that no one's going to trade for a back of the roster running back who's making $3 million.
Well, and people don't understand trade value. Something that I meant to mention in the Ritter conversation, the amount of people that were like, and remember the Cardinals gave up Rondale Moore for him. It's like
Rondale Moore wasn't making this team. He was always going to be cut or traded because they moved on. They decided Greg Dortch was going to do that. And this became an absolute wash of a trade. Absolute wash, because Rondale Moore is on injured reserve and will be a free agent. Atlanta gets absolutely nothing out of Rondale Moore.
Well, and
the Cardinals apparently are not getting, like, the Cardinals might get a practice squad, 3rd number 3 guy, but I mean, they didn't get the backup quarterback they wanted. What a wash, like a complete wash of a trade.
But, and it's not just that. People are like, well, you know, it's value. Like, what could they have gotten instead of Ritter? And it's like, nothing. Literally, like
it might have been a 7th round pick.
Right. That's why they got Ritter. Like, because there was no other value.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but the Carter thing, like, I mean, people just, like you said, it's one of those things. It's the value of the contract. I'm going to be interested to see if he gets picked up. I mean, I really am. Like, Cardinals fans are an interesting group, as we know, and they're very, I don't want to say upset, but they're very negative about him being gone. But the reality is, like, they were only one of 3 teams that claimed him last year. Like, it's not like there was 25 teams trying to go after him.
Right. I think.
And I like him too. Like you said, yes, I think he's a absolutely player.
But like when they drafted Trey Benson,
it spelled the end for him.
Right. And we said this in the offseason. This is now down to DeMarcado and Carter. And what DeMarcado does is perfect for the back of the roster because he showed that he's a capable backup. Like he can carry that load for a game, but he's great on third down. He plays a lot of special teams. He gives you some return upside, so you can fill him in the returns game. And DJ Dallas, the people that were suggesting that they were going to cut DJ Dallas, one thing, they signed him to a 3-year contract and committed $2.4 million in guaranteed money this year alone. He was making the team. Now, he probably is just a returner, but that was why they signed him. He had some maybe he has some running back upside, but there was little chance that he was going to be cut in favor of Carter. So, like we said for a long time, these four running backs were always locked in. It was just a matter of would they keep 5, and it doesn't make sense to keep the 5. And I honestly like this room. I don't think that that they will make any move. I can't imagine them claiming another back. Bummer for Tony Jones Jr. to injure his shoulder on that play, and now he's on injured reserve, so they can't even bring him back to the practice squad, and so they will need practice squad.
Or you look at it and you go, hey, go for Tony Jones Jr. He's
Right.
going to get a
because now he does
payoff.
He does get that payout. It'll be more than practice squad. I probably is 400,000 or 500,000 because he probably had a split contract. But Hassan Hall, they'll probably bring him to the practice squad. My guess is Michael Carter he'll go unclaimed. So then he'll sign a minimum deal with another team rather than coming with Arizona's practice squad.
The other thing I was thinking is, he's the guy that, if anything happens in week 1, that they go and try to get him back, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And so that's the thing is, it's not the end necessarily of Michael Carter in Arizona, but I don't, like you said, I don't think we should be as surprised as some people are.
Nope. Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, the Bizarre Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on and talk about the pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends. That's coming next on Rise of Sierra Red. We're back on the Rise of Sierra Red podcast, Bizarre Cardinals Talk on the Web. The Cardinals kept 6 wide receivers and 4 tight ends. I guess the biggest news that happened over the last week was the fact that Zay Jones was nicked with a 5-game suspension, which came as a shock to a lot of us. He did have a domestic battery arrest last year. It was dropped. The charges were dropped in March after a review of the evidence, which that can mean a lot of things. Maybe for a prosecutor, it probably meant that the evidence wasn't substantial enough to convict. So why take it to court?
Yeah,
but the NFL investigated, and they threw the hammer down. And Howard Balzer, he was telling me one thing that probably impacted their decision is that this supposedly happened in front of a child, and so with the things that supposedly happened, and plus being in front of a child, 5 games, still that's a bummer, but it made the wide receiver room a little bit easier. And the top 3 were always a lock because we know it's going to be Marv, it's going to be Michael Wilson, it's going to be Greg Dortch. And so, but the 3 other receivers they kept were Chris Moore, Zach Pascal sneaks onto the roster, and the undrafted kid Xavier Weaver. I think we both felt that Weaver probably won his way onto the roster. One, he made plays with in the passing game. So I don't know how much he'll be used, but he then becomes the backup slot. Zay Jones was listed as the backup slot, but he could play all 3 positions, and I think that's kind of how they view Weaver. They can use him as the backup slot to Dortch. And plus, he looked really good in return. So the Cardinals now, between DJ Dallas and Xavier Weaver, I think you have, at least for kick returns, you've got your 2 main returners for the kicking game. And both made great plays, and Weaver was really good in the return game all through the preseason. We'll see how that goes. But the Z Jones thing for me was That brought Pascal back to the roster. We sort of felt that Chris Moore was going to replace Pascal, but Pascal survives. And, whatever he's not going to play on offense, but he's a willing and blocker, so you might see him a few times. And he's got a connection with Jonathan Gannon. He's a solid special teams player. So, welcome back, ZP.
And how long does he have to be on the roster for his contract to guarantee? Is he that far of a veteran? I can't ever remember.
I'm gonna check.
But yeah, to your point, there was no shocks here after Zay Jones got suspended, right? And he's a vested vet with this will be his 7th year, so once he's on for game 1, he's
his salary is locked in.
So no shock here. And you go to the tight end room and not a whole lot of shock other than they kept 4. But if you've paid attention, that's not surprising either, right?
No, honestly, they've had all last year. And we have to look at the Jonathan Gannon, Monty Austin-Ford era is what have been their roster tendencies. Even though they would usually only have 3 tight ends active, all year they had 4 on the roster. I thought that might be a position that got shorted because they wanted to keep players at other positions, and likely they viewed Travis Vokalek and Blake Whitehart as either. I'd be happy with it. That's how I viewed it. But in the preseason finale, Vokalek didn't play either, so it was very clear that he was definitely ahead of Whitehart. But yeah, and I don't see them doing anything with the tight end position. They've got the star in Trey McBride. They've got an up-and-comer in Higgins that they're really excited about. Tip Ryman looks like. I don't see them with them needing to do anything. And I think Vokalek is a nice number 4 because he also gives you that sort of blocking upside that Ryman does. And I'm interested. I'm going to bet, because we know that Bernhard Seikovits, he's going to be back on the practice squad with the international exemption. But my guess is Blake Whitehart probably makes it again, and maybe he has a shot next year, because Whitehart, if you notice something in the preseason, both years, played a ton on special teams. And so he might be able to crack that roster like he did late last year as a number 3, as a number 4 tight end who plays a lot of special teams.
Yeah, and that's a deep room, like you said, and the top 3 look like they can be problems for other teams. So that's exciting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming next on Legends Secret Podcast, best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about the next position group. We'll do offensive line, defensive line, and the edge. That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. The offensive line decisions, not terribly surprising. The guys that they ended up keeping were their starters, which means Paris Johnson on the left side at left tackle. You get Evan Brown at left guard, Yelda Froholt at center, Will Hernandez at right guard, Jonah Williams at right tackle. Kelvin Beachum is your backup tackle. You have Tristan Colon and John Gaines as center guards, and you get Isaiah Adams as a guard who played a little tackle in college. And I was mildly, so that one of the most significant cuts, and it's not a significant playing time, it's the cut Elijah Wilkinson. He didn't look good in preseason. When he started those games at guard last year, he was the weak link on the offensive line. But his contract is fully guaranteed, and as a vested veteran, he doesn't have to get he wouldn't have gotten claimed on waivers. I wonder if Wilkinson was maybe roster manipulation, because if he assuming he still wants to play football for the Cardinals, he'll take a practice squad spot because he's still going to make every bit of his $1.7 million this year. And so I was surprised, not because of the play, but because of roster management, because they only have one backup tackle, and that's it.
Yeah,
Cologne.
that's
I figured I would. I always had Wilkinson on one because of guaranteed money, and two because it gave me a swing tackle in Beecham, a guard tackle in Wilkinson, and then a center guard in Gaines, and then a two guard in Adams. And so you kind of had depth at all the positions. You had positional versatility. And so in that sense, I was surprised at Wilkinson. And I wonder if he wouldn't be a guy that they would end up
bringing back on the
in practice squad. He's the guy that they elevate to be one of their 8 offensive linemen on game day. And Isaiah Adams, my guess, Isaiah Adams will be inactive almost all season, and that Cologne might be also if they go that route with Wilkinson being called up.
And you think Brown will be the backup center in that case then?
Well, they still got Gaines, so technically,
oh,
so
that's right. I forgot about Gaines too.
You'd have Gaines, and technically, they've got 4 centers on the roster. Technically,
so are you at all? Surprise is probably not the right word, but like Marquise Hayes played very well in the preseason. Were you surprised that they cut him, or was this just a numbers game at that point? Where
I think it was absolutely numbers games, because I mean, were they going to keep him ahead of Gaines and Adams?
Right.
I never thought that.
I thought he had a chance over Gaines, but like you said, the versatility of Gaines to play.
And by the way, quietly, they love Gaines.
Yeah. No, and I knew that they like Gaines. So, and I think the versatility does matter, and for some people that's hard to understand. They get tired of that, but we're talking about backup offensive linemen, right? We're not talking about most of the time. When that happens, we're not talking about guys that they view as starters, but guys that they value as backups. And and that's kind of what they look at in Gaines, is like they're like, he may never be a starter, but he's a guy we trust in these situations, and he can play, in this case, 3 positions, either guard spot or center, if they need it. And that matters over a guy who in Hayes, who you might go, well, he looked better and he looks like he's got more starting potential upside. Okay, but he plays left guard and that's all he does. And if he can't start at left guard, you can't, like, as much as people are like, oh, you keep 9 or 10 offensive linemen, you really don't keep a backup at every offensive line position. Like, it's very rare that happens.
10 is rare, and usually that 10th guy is someone who,
well, like you kind of just described Isaiah Adams, right? A guy that makes the roster who's gonna never see the active roster because he'll be inactive on game days all year.
Yeah. And then I guess the one thing of note because none of the other cuts were surprising, honestly. Wilkinson was the only mildly surprising one to me, but the one move that was intriguing was Christian Jones going to injured reserve, and then because Christian Jones, we saw some struggles, and he's one of their draft picks. But they didn't just, and I thought he might have gotten, because we've seen this happen with rookies before, especially day 3 rookies. Marquise Hayes is a perfect example. Had a great rookie preseason. What happened? He got stashed on IR the whole year. He wasn't going to make the roster, and he had an injury that wasn't too serious, but
bad
but
enough that they could
they could put him and stash him, and he's had 3 consecutive solid preseasons, and one of these years, maybe he'll crack the rotation or get signed somewhere else and actually have a chance to play. But Christian Jones got injured in the finale, and he was put on injured reserve, and it was suggested, well, maybe they're just going to redshirt him, but they didn't. They're not going to just redshirt him because he and Darius Robinson were both designated to return. Now, Robinson, we'll talk about that in a second. You could only designate 2 players to return, and it counts against the 8 that you're allowed to designate over the course of a season. And so that fact suggests that they had plans of keeping Christian Jones.
Yeah, and I think we're both a little surprised by the whole situation.
Yep.
And not to take anything away from Jones or what he has done or earned the opportunity to continue to do. But like you said, he struggled. He didn't look good, and he didn't look like the type of guy that was going to get picked up off of waivers. So he was exactly what you're kind of talking about, of like the prime guy that, we'll just dash him away for a year. Nobody needs to know about him, right? Like,
right, and then Beachum will age out, and then you can ideally, he becomes your backup swing tackle next year.
Yeah, so that was the only surprise to me along the offensive. I will say this: I was pleasantly surprised that they moved on from Elijah Wilkinson with how poorly he played last season and this season. And like you said, if they do that roster manipulation and that ends up being what happens, good on Monty for being able to manipulate the system, right?
Because that is something that is one thing that you have some flexibility. If you're a vested veteran with guaranteed money, hey, unless he has hard feelings, right. You can, like they did with Devon Kennard a couple of years ago. He had guaranteed money, and they had him on the practice squad, but they had him listed on the depth chart as well, because they fully intended on elevating him each week or signing him to the active roster and then cutting him, because when you're a vested vet, you don't go through waivers, and so you're never at risk of losing him unless he wants to leave. And so we'll see how that goes. I'm guessing that will be the route, is that practice squad. And here's the thing, is that almost all contracts have offsets. So if he has a better opportunity, by all means go get it. The Cardinals won't feel bad, because then they will be off the hook for whatever he makes with that other team. And if he's on the practice squad, well, I think he should feel all right, because he's still getting paid all his money, which, in fairness, we've talked about this before. The Players Association, for sometimes it feels like a bummer, or it feels like they're stealing money. Like good for them, they got hurt, they're on IR, so they just earned themselves $500,000. And that there's protections for players, and that can actually be a lifesaver for a up and comer, someone who hasn't proven himself to, if they were looked kind of good, and if they suffer an injury, they're rewarded for their work, because it's a workplace injury, and they don't end up getting just cut. They still get paid.
Right.
On the defensive line, I guess the one move, we were looking to see what the move would be made, and they did in fact put Darius Robinson on injured reserve and designated him for return, which means we won't see the first round pick until at least week 5, when they go on the road to San Francisco. The bummer for that is the hard part with that means he can't practice. He can't practice for 4 weeks either, which is one of the bummers, but it tells us kind of what they view in terms of that calf injury. So it was probably a 4 to 6 week injury, and 6 week would put him at week 5.
And we never talked about the injury last week, right? Because we weren't able to yet.
Well, we didn't know about it because it happened on Thursday.
That's right, and
it happened on Thursday, and yeah, that was, I have things to say about what Jonathan Gannon said, because it was in fact our Howard Balzer who reported on the imaging, but I'm just going to leave it at that. There was a disagreement about what was done. Gannon thought it was improper, how it was not done improperly. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that, because I have feelings about that. It was because before Howard put that information out, he and I had a 30-minute conversation of how to make sure to go about that without it suggesting any closed part of practice. So
Yeah, and I'm one of those people too that thinks that the cloak and dagger situation the NFL tries to pull with stuff like that is silly. And so I got your back, Jess.
So the 6 guys they kept on the roster on the defensive line made all sense. We knew that 5 of those were locks. We thought there were definitely 6 locks. Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, Roy Lopez, Robinson, LJ Collier, Dante Stills, and we wondered about Kyrus Tonga with Darius Robinson on injured reserve. It was an easy decision. You keep Kyrus Tonga, and what you've got a 2 like legit nose tackles. I know they list LJ Collier as a nose tackle. He's not a traditional nose tackle. He can play any position on the line, but you've got Roy Lopez and Kyrus Tonga, who are your prototypical nose tackles. Bilal Nichols can do it, and then you've got 4 guys that can play kind of all across the line. It's a good mix.
It is.
Who do you think of the group? And honestly, I don't think that will be a position that they will address on waivers. Do you think, like the guys, you got Ben Stilley, Phil Hoskins, Naquan Jones, how many of those guys do you think will end up back on the practice squad?
I think the one you didn't mention, Myles Murphy.
Oh, Myles Murphy. Yes. Myles Murphy, I think, is unless he might get claimed. Like he's a guy that might get claimed.
Could be.
That's possible, but I think he'll be a lock for that. And of those 4 guys, between he, Stilley, Hoskins, and Jones, I'm guessing 2 will probably be on the practice squad. If you had to pick,
I think it would be Murphy and Stilley, and then Jones, and then Hoskins would be kind of your last guy, just based on what we've seen over the last year plus of them playing, or being part of the rotation.
I think I would put Jones slightly over Stilley. I mean, Stilley's play suggests more, but he was with the team to begin with last year. They added Jones late, and Jones was a guy that was with the Titans when Monty was there. And so that's why I wonder if maybe Jones might be ahead of Stilley in that sense. So that we'll see how that goes. But I this defensive line, like we've talked about it before, this is a rotation that you feel much better about. Now, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, and Roy Lopez as a starting unit with LJ Collier, Kyrus Tonga, Dante Stills all coming off the bench. You feel really good. You feel really all right about that group.
And to that point, right? Like, so you feel all right about it, and you feel like they're at a better spot overall, right? Like that they're something we've talked about is that they're improving, and that those position groups of weakness aren't necessarily becoming strengths, but they're not glaring weaknesses like they were previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we go to the edge. This is the one where there was the surprise news on Monday night, and that was Cardinals traded Cam Thomas. And I will say this:
when you got all that depth, Jess, it's not a big deal, right?
Ian Rappaport's with depth at the position, they trade Cam Thomas to the Chiefs for a 7th round pick. What depth? I mean, I guess they technically have depth because they have players, and that was going to be a position that was going to be hard to cut, guys. But I will say, and I know that Thomas hadn't proven much, and he was playing late into the preseason. I'm disappointed because I really liked what I thought there was no way for Thomas to fail. I thought that he would be a moderately producing pass rusher in the league because he had the physical skills. He had the requisite athleticism, and he had the motor. And his rookie year suggested that he was ascending. And apparently nobody the Cardinals drafted before last year fit these Arizona Cardinals. And I wish Cam the best because I am a big Cam Thomas fan. I've been a big Cam Thomas fan since he was drafted, and I'm bummed that he was traded because I want him to do well, and I wanted that to be on the Cardinals. But it wasn't a shock that he was cut or that he was traded, but I still feel like I feel like he's a better player than Victor Dimukeje or Jesse Luketa. But Victor Dimukeje and Jesse Luketa also offer something that is upside on special teams. They both play a role on special teams. Dimukeje's been, and that's the part, like when he kind of emerged last year, what people forgot, Dimukeje plays a lot on special teams, and that impacted. So they've got 5 outside backers: Zaven Collins, Dennis Gardick, Xavier Thomas, Victor Dimukeje, Jesse Luketa. That is not a formidable edge group. And the talk Monday night was like, there's got to be something else coming, right? I don't think anything else is coming.
No, I don't think anything's coming. I mean, again, you and I talked about this off the air, but I think the reality becomes that Monty Ossenfort's being very patient in what he's trying to do, and that's build this roster for a long-term gains. And whether that works out or not is yet to be seen, clearly, but he's not looking for a quick fix. And whether you and I agree with it or not, and I can tell you that Jess and I are not in total agreement with, one, the Thomas move, and 2, the lack of counter move or additional move in this situation. Well, it's young, and it's in how it's going, and we've seen a number of different ways that the Cardinals have tried to go about this previously with little to no success. And so why why throw that out already when we don't know? So let's give them some time. Let's give them some work before we say our part. But I will say, you and I were both very surprised to see that they not only moved on from Cameron Thomas, but they don't seem to be in a hurry to make an additional move.
And honestly, it might simply be because of the quality of players available.
100%.
And it's Zaven Collins, Dennis Gardick, Xavier Thomas, Victor Dimukeje, Jesse Luketa. That is the edge group. I think we also need to recognize that we probably will see some Mac Wilson, which brings us, in fact, coming to next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. Let's talk about this next. And in fact, we'll go the final segment of positions at inside linebacker, the defensive back positions, and the special. We'll talk about the specials for like 3 seconds because we knew what those were going to be. That's coming next on Rise of Seaward. We're back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. The next position is the puzzling one, is that's at inside linebacker, a position where they kept 5 on the roster all last year, and now they have 3 because they cut all of the guys behind Owen Papo, and they cut Chris Barnes, who played a significant amount of time on the field last year. So all they're left with is Kaiser White, Mac Wilson, and Owen Papo, and coupled with the fact that we expect to see Wilson rushing off the edge in some packages, who's going to play linebacker for them?
It's a fair question, Jess. This was another one that was a little surprising to us. Not that Owen didn't earn the spot over Chris Barnes. In fact, I think you and I would both agree that he, in fact, did earn the spot over Chris Barnes. But it became interesting that they're only going with 3 guys after what has been, mostly, like you said, not something that they've done consistently. They've usually consistently had more than that, and with the way that they're likely to use Mac Wilson, to see them go about it this way and then not really have any thing there that's a little bit of a shock, right?
Yeah. And I will say this, they do often, based on what we saw last year, will go with a big nickel which will maintain their 3 interior defenders with their edge players. So they've got a 5-man front. It becomes rather than sort of a 4-2-5 in alignment as it would go, it becomes a 5-1-5, and they go with one linebacker in the middle of the field and Kaiser White, and go with 3 safeties, or maybe that means a Rabbit gets some playing time, where they're going to find ways to include him. But it does feel like, in my eyes, I'm looking at the roster, if there's something happening at a position, it's got to be at inside backer, you'd think.
Yeah, and there's, it's not a strong group overall, but there are some guys that will probably end up available at inside backer that could potentially be, and the reality with Barnes is, right, that he's probably not going to be a guy that people are clamoring after. So
no, he could be practice squad, and he could be a guy that they elevate as depth. So we'll see. I mean, you only get 2 elevations a week, so it'll be interesting how they go about that. I did find it surprising over at cornerback and safety. They kept 11 defensive backs, which was a surprise. The 6 cornerbacks for me that they kept, not a surprise at all. Sean Murphy-Bunting, Starling Thomas, Garrett Williams, Max Melton, the rookie, Keitrell Clark, and Elijah Jones. I had them keeping those guys the entire time. Elijah Jones hurting his ankle in the final preseason game. I wondered if he would get redshirted.
I thought that was coming, man. I was betting on that. I actually on my predictions, I had him and Christian Jones both being redshirted. I was like, oh, they're definitely going to redshirt both those guys with the injury designation. And so the fact that neither of them did, it tells you what they think of them, right? And again, right, wrong, or otherwise, they like what these guys have and what they've shown, and they want to see them on the field before they make any decisions on that. So.
Yep, and the 3 guys that they have is obviously right now, Star Thomas is going to start over Max Melton, which might be disappointing for a lot of people, but Star Thomas has been consistent since the offseason. He's made an impression. Max will probably pass him up at some point. We've seen that before. But one thing we know about Melton in college, he was a stud special teams player. He will have an impact on 4th down. Elijah Jones was a good special teams player as well. And I think we can expect all 3 of those guys' depth to play well on special teams, although it'll be interesting to see what between Jones and Clark, because probably one of them will be inactive each week, is my guess.
Yeah.
And then we get to and so I don't see them really making any moves at any position at cornerback. I don't think they claim anyone, and getting guys from other groups for the practice squad, that could always happen. But
that's
I think
such a shot in the dark for us to try to predict who.
I think the fact that they kept 6 cornerbacks on the roster suggests that they are happy with the cornerbacks that they have on the roster, because they made it a point to keep that many.
Yeah, and like you said, Jones and Clark, we thought it would come down to which one, and not that they would cut Elijah Jones, but we figured they would, as you've expertly pointed out a couple of times, try to manipulate the situation a little bit. And it didn't even seem like it crossed their mind, right? They came out and they said, no, we got 6 NFL quality cornerbacks, and one thing we know about Jonathan Gannon is he has a heart for the corner position and DBs, and having coached that before becoming a DC and then obviously a head coach. And so I think that makes sense why he kept a larger number there.
And then we go to safety. This is another surprise. 5 safeties. And it wasn't just
Andre Chauchere wasn't one of them.
Right. That's the part. And I was interested because in the preseason finale, it wasn't Chauchere that was on the bench. It was Joey Blunt. And, we keep Judah Baker, we kept Jalen Thompson, Rabbit Taylor Demerson. Those were all locks. And it was just a question of who's the fourth guy. And instead, they kept 5. They kept Blunt, a stud special teamer, and they rewarded Darren Hall, who had a fantastic preseason. He gives them versatility because he can play safety. Like in the offseason, he was initially listed as a cornerback, covered the slot, played safety. Will be interesting to see if they use him on special teams or like if he happened to be player 53. Right. I wonder if that was the case, if he was player 53 and they reward him knowing that he's probably going to get cut and ideal on the practice squad after that. I felt they only had room for 4 safeties on the roster, but they managed to do it anyway. I'm glad Hall made the squad, but it's not like he's going to play.
He might.
Rabbit's going to play. He's going
to stuff.
Yeah, he might play special teams. But I think Rabbit's going to play special teams, and Joey Blunt is a great special teams player. So I do not expect the roster to remain at 5 safeties. I don't expect that. I bet, especially since the Cardinals have a high waiver prior to their number 4, that they will probably acquire 2-3 players. And Darren Hall will be one guy that sees the axe. And then we'll see who else is. Probably Travis Vokalek, tight end. And maybe
Kyrus Tonga.
And maybe Kyrus Tonga, but that depends because that leaves them at only 5 defensive linemen on the active roster. So maybe Zach Pascal or Chris Moore. I think they've locked themselves into Weaver, and rather than keeping his 6 is now the 6 was between Chris Moore and Pascal. So, but
and maybe even a corner like Keytrell or Jones ends up getting hurt.
Or here's a thought. Here's a thought. Maybe Jones is hurt enough to go on injured reserve,
and they're just waiting.
And they're waiting because you can only designate 2 if it's before they've been on the roster.
That makes sense.
And so maybe Elijah Jones will still end up on injured reserve. So we'll see. But he'll come back later in the year. And then obviously the specialist, there was no surprise there. It was Prater, Gillikin, and Brewer. No, that was never going to change because there's just a one thing that they did keep. They kept Brewer on the roster the last couple of years. They technically cut him and then signed him to the practice squad and then elevated and then signed him for the game. Just as a way to finesse the roster to keep guys, because he's one of those guys where he doesn't go through waivers, and so you can just immediately re-sign him. And he knows, being the only long snapper on the team, he's going to play on Sunday. So there was one thing though about his contract. He did have an almost an $84,000 roster bonus due. I'm not sure if it was final roster, if it was the week 1 roster, if he would get that. And so, yeah, they did. If it was for making the initial roster, good on them for not, causing him to lose his $84,000.
Right. Exactly.
And with that, is there anything else?
No, I was while we were talking, I was kind of going through the list of names. It's really not an intriguing list. There's some edge rushers that maybe you could kick the tires on, but I mean, they've already worked out the name's escaping me now. It's Orokru or something. Was it Bobby Orokru? One of the guys, I can't remember off the top of my head now. And it's one of those situations where I just don't think that there's enough in there's enough difference in these guys to make a big splash or try to make a big move, right? Like they gotta see what they have and then kind of adjust for that and go from there. And so we'll see where that comes out at. But edge guys don't make it to the cut list, really, right? Like
No, not guys that are worth a dang.
Right. So now you have to sit here and find it and see how it works out, and we'll see how it goes.
It'll be interesting. And obviously by the time you guys hear this show, we'll know if the Cardinals have been, because 9 a.m. Arizona time, so by about noon, we will know if the Cardinals were awarded any players and what other corresponding moves have been made. But that will wrap up this edition of the show. Obviously, it'll be kind of outdated by the time you're listening, but with that, we're probably, unless there's something earth-shattering, it'll be our one normal show this week. We've got Howard on an audio update with roster cuts. We'll see if anything else happens this week. But other than that, we'll be back again next week as we get ready for week 1. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, rise up, see red.